This is Houston Matters. I'm Craig Cohen. The city of Houston has long been in the process of reinventing itself, building, developing, then demolishing, and building something new. Wash, rinse, repeat. There are pros and cons, of course, to any development. Among the possible downsides that whatever you're doing will change the nature of a community, minimize its culture, or diminish its history. That's one reason the city of Houston has a process to designate historic districts, but it's not exactly easy to do. There's also something called a heritage district designation for some public streets and rights of way. A new proposal from a task force within the city of Houston's Planning and Development Department would create a third designation that the task force thinks might do a better job of preserving cultural and historic aspects of the city. Here to tell us about it is Margaret Wallace Brown, the director of the city's Planning and Development Department. Margaret, welcome to the program.
Good morning. Thank you for having me today.
As we chat, we welcome your questions and comments about historic and cultural preservation and the concept of conservation district designations. That's what we're talking about at 713-440-8870. You can email us at talk@houstonmatters.org. Could you first walk us through the process of designating an area in the city of Houston as an historic district? What's involved with that?
It's a very labor-intensive effort for the community. It requires that the community take an inventory of the properties that they want designated because the purpose is at least 50% of the properties that end up in the district must be compatible, must be designated as contributing structures to the district itself. And so the inventory can be very onerous for the community. And then in addition to that, it requires that 67% of the property owners affirmatively agree to be located in that district. That's a really high bar. Not 67% of the responses, but 67% of the property owners. And so getting that property ownership response is really difficult, particularly in neighborhoods where there may be a lower ownership rate and a higher rental rate. And then, just the challenge within the community of what is regulated and what some communities feel is a really complicated and difficult process to even do minor improvements to their structures.
Yeah, I was going to say, so you get this historic designation in a given neighborhood. What then does that mean in terms of what can and cannot happen in that neighborhood?
Well, within with few exceptions, any alterations that are made to the exterior of a contributing structure. So, for instance, if you replace windows, if you replace siding, if you add on to it, if you want to demolish it, if you want to make any alterations to the exterior of it that's visible from the street, and that's the key. We don't care what happens inside. We don't care what happens in the backyard if it's not visible from the street. But if you want to make any alterations to something that's visible from the street, you have to go through a process with the planning department. There's a fee associated with the application. There's many things can be done in a week or 2 week time administratively, but sometimes it's a bigger project and has to go to the commission, which could delay your project, which also adds a slight layer of unpredictability to it. And so it's just a process that in Houston, we're the land of property rights. And so Houstonians often think that is more work than they want to go through.
What are some examples of areas of the city that have that designation?
Oh, we have 22 historic districts in Houston. They range from some of our oldest communities, which is Old 6th Ward, right immediately adjacent to downtown. The ones that are probably the most well-known are the Heights historic districts. There's actually 3 in the Heights area. Montrose and the Museum District have a few historic districts. The smallest one is probably Cortland Place, which is in a portion of Montrose. And then probably our largest and perhaps the largest in the nation is Glenbrook Valley, which is a mid-century modern community just near Hobby Airport that was created 15 years ago, I guess, which is all mid-century ranches, the really 1960s era homes.
All right, so that's historic districts. There is also this designation heritage districts. What are the circumstances under which a public street or right-of-way can be designated a heritage district?
So many communities want the ability to do, whether it's art installations or painting intersections or anything to protect. In Freedmanstown, they're very concerned about the brick streets. Many communities want the ability to protect the rights of way. And while the city of Houston is the owner of our rights of way and we do our own job in protecting them, they want to be able to work with us on, as I said, our installations and other things. A heritage district is really an agreement between a community-based organization, such as a conservancy or a civic club or something like that. And the civic club agrees that within certain areas, they will work with us to do installations, to improve the rights of way. It includes no private property. There is no regulations placed on private property at all. It's really a relationship on how the city and the community group will take care of the streets and the sidewalks.
All right, so that covers the public property, the historic designation covers private property. Why, in your view, does the city need a third designation of a conservation district?
So historic districts, as I said earlier, focus on historic material. They are created in areas where there is a significant amount of historic fabric. At least 50% of the properties have to be contributing to the district. But there are other communities that have a historic nature to them, but may not have as much contributing material left. Neighborhoods like Independence Heights, like Freedmanstown. In the National Register district in Freedmanstown, there's approximately 40 structures that are still historic in that district. But the neighborhood still wants to maintain its personality, its character. And so a conservation district is a way for that to take place when we're not talking about the historic materials. We're not talking about replacing windows or the size of shutters or things like that. What we're talking about is the ability for a neighborhood to determine what's important to it, and then the city can regulate it based on the community input.
So what sorts of protections would such a designation offer?
So again, let me just say this is a proposal that we are taking to City Council, so nothing is carved in stone yet. But in the proposal we're taking, there are about 19 items that a neighborhood could choose from, things like building height, the number of stories that a building could be, the front and side setbacks, which are often regulated by deed restrictions, but these kind of neighborhoods probably don't have active deed restrictions, and so that's another layer for them. New development often takes access from side yards, or the driveways become the prominent feature in some new development. And the neighborhoods, particularly in Independence Heights, is concerned about driveways being so predominant. And so perhaps they may choose to regulate how the garage addresses the street and how the property takes access from the street. The beauty of conservation districts is that they are tailor fit for the community. Of these 19 potential things they could regulate, a community will pick 5, 6, I don't know, however many they choose to. And so each conservation district across the city is different, unlike historic districts, which regulate the same thing in each of the different districts.
How is it different from deed restrictions or a neighborhood homeowners association's rules or something like that?
Well, a neighborhood homeowners association typically only has rules if they are, in fact, deed restrictions. And deed restrictions have lapsed over time. Many of our older communities, they don't have deed restrictions any longer. And this is another way for a community to say, this is what's important to us without having to go through the very onerous deed restriction process.
This is Houston Matters. I'm Craig Cohen. We're discussing the concept of conservation districts, a proposed new designation that proponents believe might simplify the process of preserving some cultural and historic parts of the city of Houston. Our guest is Margaret Wallace Brown, director of the city's Planning and Development Department. We welcome your questions and comments at talk@houstonmatters.org or 713-440-8870. Who's on the committee that's come up with this proposed designation?
So the Livable Places Action Committee was established about 2 years ago, and it's made up of a variety of people representing such areas of our town as, it includes neighborhood advocates, affordable housing advocates, planning experts from Texas Southern University, the Kinder Institute. It does include developers or people who need to, who will build according to the rules we're establishing, and it includes preservationists. The purpose of this committee is to look through our development code and through the plans. Houston's really good at developing plans. We've got Resilient Houston, we have Plan Houston. There are a number of neighborhoods that have livable center studies. Houston's not the greatest. Most cities aren't at implementing these plans. And so what this committee's charged with is going through these plans and identifying things that we can do, rules that we can change to encourage affordability, walkability, equity in our housing. We need more homes for Houstonians. And how do we make that possible? How do we make them more affordable? What are the rules that we have in place that are making homes more expensive?
How does this proposed new designation square with that overarching goal?
Well, it does, because part of what their job is to look at how to look at the plans that have been created by neighborhoods and figure out how to implement them. And so neighborhood protection, maintaining community character, encouraging affordable housing, all of those things come from virtually every plan we've seen developed over the past few years, whether it's the Complete Communities plans or the Livable Centers plans. Communities really want the ability to kind of have a say in how they develop, and making sure that development in their neighborhoods is compatible and sympathetic to what's already there.
Is there a risk that by creating this new designation that some areas that might otherwise have been pursued and established as historic districts will get this designation instead and maybe have fewer protections from development as a result?
I'd say that risk exists, but I think the real question is how many more communities can we preserve the character of with this program than we could have with historic districts. This really focuses on neighborhoods where the material, where there really is a lower number of historic structures, but the character remains. And you're not going to be able to create a historic district in something like an Independence Heights, or actually even in Freedmanstown right now, because the historic material is lost. This is a way we can help those communities.
Would it then preclude pursuing a historic district designation if there was enough reason to, desire to, for that same location in the future?
Absolutely not. No, they could certainly pursue it. Yes, and and I think that there's maybe an opportunity to have some overlays where certain areas within a conservation district might say this particular block within this conservation district wants some more restrictive rules. I think that's a possibility.
How can the public weigh in on this?
Oh, very easily. So the proposed ordinance is posted on the City of Houston's, the Planning Department's website. Go to Let's Talk Houston. You can get to it either from HoustonPlanning.com or Let's Talk Houston. I can never remember if it's org or com. They're going to kill me because I don't remember. One of the two, but it's posted there. The comment period is open. We've had one public hearing at the Historic Commission. We expect to have a second public hearing in early February and hope to have the enabling legislation, the Conservation District Creation Ordinance, at City Council in late February. And
then any idea of a timeline? Just once it's offered up to Council for consideration, there's no guarantee they'll necessarily get to it right away.
Oh, right. No. If we get it on the agenda in late February, they'll get to it. There's no question about that. The question will be then what neighborhoods will pursue this. We're already working with Independence Heights. We think that Independence Heights will be one of our first conservation districts. They've got a lot of, Independence Heights is a good example. There's a lot of development pressure, and they don't want to stop the development. A historic district would actually kind of put an end to the new development in some form or fashion. Independence Heights doesn't necessarily want to do that. What they do want, though, is compatible development that's sympathetic to what their neighborhood is, and we believe they'll be one of our first conservation districts.
When proposals for projects come to the city's planning and development department, how much attention is paid to the possible impact of those projects on the affected neighborhood's history, culture, and identity? How much of it is about that, and how much is about there's a desire for development?
I think the planning department balances the needs pretty carefully. The challenge that we have is we have a set of rules established in the development code for the city of Houston, and state law says that if a development meets those codes, those rules, then the planning commission doesn't have discretion. And so there are a number of times where the planning commission really does grimace as they approve a project. If the project asks for variances from those rules, we have a lot more ability to help work with the developer and find ways to make the development more appropriate for the neighborhood. And we take every opportunity we can to make sure that what we when we are recommending the approval of a variance, that it also provides something for the city as well and for the community.
Could this new designation reduce the number of instances of that grimacing?
In any particular conservation district, yeah, it could.
Margaret Wallace Brown is Director of Planning and Development, that department for the City of Houston. Margaret, thank you very much for talking with us.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.